Number 1. Blind River Killer. In 1991, 62-year-old Gord McAllister and his 59-year-old wife, Jackie, were on a road trip in the motorhome when they decided to pull over at an isolated rest stop near Blind River, Ontario, to spend the night. At 12:55 a.m., a man claiming to be a police officer knocked on their door. He claimed that they had to move their RV. When Jackie opened the door, the man had 2 guns with him and demanded all their money and valuables. She put her rings and jewelry in her purse and then gave it to him. Then, for no apparent reason, he shot her. Gord was able to jump out of the motorhome and hide under it as the man fired at him. At around the same time, Brian Major, a 29-year-old husband and father, arrived at the rest stop and asked if the man needed help. When he noticed that he had a gun, he tried to get back into his car and start. He was then shot by the gunman. After that, the gunman got into his van and drove off. After the killer was gone, Gord was able to make it to the road and flag down a truck for help. He survived the incident and provided a description for a composite sketch of the suspect. The only other major lead was an eyewitness who saw a blue van speeding out of the rest area around the time of the murders. Unfortunately, the witness did not see what license plate the van had. A search of the vehicle records proved fruitless. In 1999, a potentially interesting development occurred when DNA testing matched a convicted criminal named Ronald Glenn West to a pair of unsolved murders which took place outside of Toronto 27 years earlier. During a 1-week period in May 1970, 2 women, Doreen Morby and Helen Ferguson, were sexually assaulted and murdered inside their homes. They were both shot with a .22 caliber weapon, and the assailant became known as the .22 caliber killer, though he never struck again. The murders were eventually tied to Ronald Glenn West, who worked as a Toronto police officer at the time. In 2001, he confessed to the 1970 murders and is serving 2 life sentences. Ronald remains a prime suspect in the case but is not charged with either of Jackie's or Brian's murders. Recently, Gord helped police make a computer composite of Jackie's killer. He is described as 5'10" with a slight build, long stringy blonde hair, and is approximately 30 years old. Gord later remarried, but he has since passed away on February 14, 2012. The case still remains unsolved. Number 2. Sam Sheppard Case. Marilyn Sheppard was a wife of Dr. Sam Sheppard, an osteopath who practiced in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1950s. Dr. Sheppard, his wife Marilyn, and their young son Sam lived in a 2-story house near the lake in a Cleveland suburb. On July 4, 1954, Marilyn Sheppard was beaten to death in her bedroom while her husband slept downstairs on the couch. Dr. Sheppard was awakened by the cries of his wife. He immediately ran upstairs to their bedroom. As he entered the bedroom, he saw what he described as a form in the bedroom. Before he knew what was going on, he was struck from behind and fell to the floor unconscious. When he regained his senses, he heard some commotion downstairs. Sheppard quickly ran downstairs and saw a form going out of the back door of his house. Sheppard ran outside and chased the form, which he later described as a bushy-haired man. He chased the man through the backyard and down to the lake located behind his house. On the shores of the lake, he struggled with the intruder. During the altercations, Sheppard received several blows which left him unconscious on the beach. When he awoke, he went back to his house, checked his wife again and called his neighbors, who immediately came to the house and called the police. Examination of the crime scene in the bedroom found Marilyn Sheppard lying on her back on the bed. She had visible lacerations to her forehead and was covered in blood, with blood splatter on the walls and around the room. Sam Sheppard was found to have bruising and swelling around his right eye and cheek. He had an injury in his neck which affected the feeling of his left arm and some damage to his teeth. There were no indication of break-in or forced entry into the home, and no murder weapon was found. It was later revealed that Sam Sheppard had been having an affair with Susan Hayes at the time of his wife's murder, a fact picked up by the media and the local newspapers, and continued to report that Sam Sheppard had clearly killed his wife and was now trying to get away with murder. As the winter of 1954 was approaching, Dr. Sam Sheppard went on a trial for the murder of his wife, Marilyn Sheppard. The prosecution's evidence proved to be too great. On December 21, 1954, the jury found Sheppard guilty of second-degree murder and was sent to prison for the rest of his life. In November 1959, the Sheppard murder case again attracted public's attention. A man by the name of Richard Eberling was arrested for burglary in the Cleveland area. Found in his possession was a ring that belonged to Marilyn Sheppard. Eberling stated that he stole the ring from the home of Dr. Sheppard's brother, Richard Sheppard. Eberling denied killing Marilyn Sheppard. During his interview with the police, he made a startling statement. He claimed he was in Dr. Sheppard's house several days before Marilyn was murdered. Eberling said he had been hired to wash the windows in Sheppard's house. While removing a storm window, Eberling said he cut his finger and dripped blood in the house. Some people questioned why Eberling would account for his blood being in the house. This new information raised the possibility that Dr. Sheppard may be innocent, and perhaps this window washer was responsible for Marilyn's death. However, the police and prosecutors felt they had convicted the right man, and Sheppard remained in prison. In 1966, with the support of up-and-coming defense attorney F. Lee Bailey, Sam Sheppard successfully won his appeal against his murder conviction on the basis that the publicity, described as massive, pervasive, and prejudicial, ensured he did not receive a fair trial. He was tried a second time for the same charge of attempted murder. In October 1966, the court heard oral arguments given by F. Lee Bailey, who argued passionately that Sheppard did not murder his wife. He pointed to the injuries Sam Sheppard suffered himself, the lack of murder weapon, and evidence of blood spots found at the crime scene which did not match either the victim or the defendant. 3 weeks later, on 16th November 1966, Sam Sheppard was found not guilty of his wife's murder and released from prison. Although out of prison, Sheppard still had his problems. The 10 years he spent in prison had taken his toll, and his health was declining. In 1970, at the age of 46, he died from liver failure. Though he was exonerated, many people then and today still believe Dr. Sam Sheppard killed his wife. In 1997, DNA testing was done on the blood found in Marilyn's bedroom. The test results showed a third person was in Marilyn's room the night she was murdered. DNA testing of Richard Eberling's blood to see if there's a match with the blood found at the murder scene showed he could not be excluded as a suspect. In 1998, Eberling died in prison, not having confessed to Marilyn's murder. The case officially remains unsolved. Number 3. Bill and Dorothy Wacker. Bill and Dorothy Wacker lived in a small town in Stark County, Ohio, in a house they lived in for most of their 48 years of marriage. Despite being quiet, unassuming people, the Wackers began being subject to a campaign of harassment that began in 1984. On January 16, 1985, the Wackers' home was ransacked. Though this had happened twice before, Bill informed the sheriff this time. In July of that year, Dorothy was home recovering from heart surgery. She heard a knock at the door and didn't recognize the man at the door, but let him in to use their phone after he said his car broke down further down the street. After making a phone call and saying goodbye, Dorothy thought the man had left. Moments later, he came behind Dorothy and hit her in the head, knocking her out. Dorothy later awoke to find herself bound and gagged. She managed to crawl to an open kitchen window and alerted her neighbors, who called 911. Dorothy was not seriously injured, but Bill later discovered that a few of his possessions were stolen, including a .22 caliber revolver, an antique watch, a movie camera, and a radio scanner. In the dining room, the message, "Cheaper, but will do," was scrawled in crayon on the wall. About 4 months after the assault, Bill found the revolver on the front porch, wrapped in a plastic shopping bag. Over time, the other 3 objects were quietly returned as well. The harasser then began calling the house, sometimes threatening the whackers with violence and sometimes simply breathing deeply into the phone. They changed their number several times, but the calls continued. The harassment began to escalate. Occasionally after dark, the whackers would hear a series of banging on the side of their house. Though they never saw or heard anything unusual when they'd check outside. Eventually, they put up a security light, but later found a note on the front porch saying, "Your lights are a laugh." Periodically, notes began appearing on the front porch, threatening and mocking the whackers. Police noted that the uneven, jagged style of writing appeared to be due to someone using their non-dominant hand to write, as if to conceal their handwriting style. No fingerprints have ever been found on the notes. On the evening of October 27, 1993, Dorothy let her dog outside and stood in the yard when she was suddenly struck in the head from behind, receiving skull lacerations. Police searched the neighborhood and questioned residences, but failed to find any clues or witnesses. In November 1993, the whackers decided to stake out their own house. The family split into 3 groups and kept in touch with 2-way radios. Bill hid in a trailer in the driveway. 2 of their son-in-laws watched from the van across the street, and Dorothy and her daughter Kathy stayed in the house. After 4 hours of waiting, they decided to call it off at around 10 p.m. Suddenly, they heard thumping sounds on the porch, where they found a note saying, "Get the message." The harasser has never been seen, and police have no leads on whom he or she might be, but suspect that a family member, friend, or a neighbor orchestrated the harassment, given the vast knowledge they had about the whackers. The man who attacked Dorothy inside her house in July of 1985 was described as a white male in his mid-20s, was about 5'9", and had blonde hair and blue eyes. After the second attack on Dorothy, police began to suspect that Bill was responsible for the harassment, but both him and Dorothy deny this. Bill passed away in 1999, and Dorothy passed away in 2010. The attacks and harassment remain unsolved to this day. Number 4. Frog Boys. On 26 March 1991, 5 boys between the ages of 9 and 13 decided to walk to Mount Woryong together to catch frogs. Yu Chul Won, Kim Young Jeo, Park Chan In, and Kim Jong Sik were all students at Seong Seo Elementary School. The boys knew the area well and lived only a few miles away from the mountain. However, they never came back home. When they failed to return at day's end, the boys' alarmed parents reported them missing, and an exhaustive search mission began, in which more than 300,000 police and troops were called to scour the area, but not a single trace of the boys was found. Over 8 million flyers were distributed all over the country, and a reward of 42 million won was promised to anybody who could locate the boys. Some of the Frog Boys' parents became so determined to find their sons that they quit their jobs so they could devote all their time in searching. Despite all the extra help, investigating the case proved to be difficult. Authorities received over 500 false leads, and at one point a man called the police and lied that he abducted the Frog Boys. The case went nowhere for 11 years, until September 26, 2002, when a man looking for acorns in Mount Woryong found scattered pieces of children's shoes and clothing. He called the police, and after they searched the mountainside, found all 5 bodies of the frog boys in a shallow pit. At first, the police suspected that the boys had frozen to death. It was cold and rainy day they went missing, and the boys might have gotten lost. The fact that their bodies were so close together might have been because they tried huddling for warmth. However, a number of disturbing clues arose during the forensic investigation. After the boys' bodies were exhumed, an autopsy concluded that 3 of the boys' skulls had marks on them, suggesting they were beaten to death by a blunt object. Additionally, 2 of the skulls had traces of blood on them, and another had 2 bullet holes inside of it, possibly from a shotgun. Police pledged to find the person or people responsible for the depraved crime, but no suspect has ever been arrested. They were eventually buried on March 25, 2004, and their skulls were donated for Gunberg University for medical research. In 2006, the case reached South Korea's 15-year statute of limitations on murder, meaning the investigation was stopped and the murderer can't be prosecuted for the crime anymore. Fortunately, South Korea removed the statute in July 2015, so perhaps there is still hope that frog boys and their families will finally receive justice. Number 1. Kamilla FightOVA and DITA Harabankova. One night after work in Ostrova Poruba in December of 1991, Kamilla FightOVA and her boyfriend were going home by bus. FightOVA was a divorced 22-year-old with her young son at home. She worked in a restaurant as a waitress to support them. Witnesses reported that FightOVA and her boyfriend got into an argument on the bus, and he got off the bus a few stops before her. Kamilla got off the bus after 3 stops and headed for home. This would be the last time she was seen alive. One local witness later reported that they thought they heard screaming late at night. They went out onto their balcony, but as it was very foggy and very dark, they couldn't see anything. The witness went back inside. When the cries fell silent after about an hour, the witness thought nothing of it and went to sleep. 3 weeks later, FightOVA's snow-covered body was discovered in the same nearby woods by a dog. It was a gruesome sight that met the police who went to investigate. Her breasts were cut off. In fact, her chest had been cut and slayed open. Her hands had been cut off at the wrists. Semen was also found on her dress. Then, 6 months later in Pruhanice near Prague, DITA Harabankova was getting ready to leave for work one afternoon. She was an attractive 21-year-old brunette who worked as a clerk for a construction company. According to her mother, she was going to meet a young man named Merc for a date. She was never seen alive again. 2 weeks later, DITA's body was discovered in a park. Similar to FightOVA, DITA had her chest cut and slayed open. Investigators discovered that several internal organs had also been removed. She still had her pants on. No semen or signs of rape or attempted rape could be found. The only clue police have discovered was DITA's handbag. It was found in a perfect condition in a landfill 6 months later. Unfortunately, nothing was discerned from it or its contents. At first, it was speculated that organ traffickers murdered both women. Coroners explained that their chest had been cut open in a way that suggested someone with a professional medical knowledge had done it. Experts investigating the case later changed their opinion, however, believing the murders to have been committed by a sadistic deviant. At one point, police believed they had a likely suspect, a young man nicknamed the Surgeon, who had moved to Ostrava Poruba shortly before FightOVA's murder. Previously, he had been convicted of numerous sexual offenses as well as attempted murder. The suspect, however, repeated that at the time of Kamilla's murder, he was not in Ostrava, but in Germany, where he was traveling to see relatives. Although he failed a lie detector test, they never had enough evidence to formally bring charges against him. Additionally, while they could link him to FightOVA, they could not link him to Hurbankova. Despite the number of people interviewed and the number of people working on the case, they both remain unsolved to this day.